I've made videos about the moon landings before, and I keep finding more and more things that blow my mind. What if I told you this mission should never have happened? That in reality, Apollo 11, the first moon landing, was an incredibly lucky mission, and it could have ended in disaster at any point. In fact, I would say there were around 20 points where a single small thing could have stopped Neil Armstrong from ever setting foot on the moon. And all of these things are way crazier than you might expect. So buckle up for a deep dive into the most insane risks of the first moon landing. The computer systems that guided Apollo 11 to the moon and back home again relied heavily on technology that simply didn't exist yet. So instead, NASA engineers created brand new computers to handle all of the complex calculations needed for such a long and complicated journey through space. But then they ran into a problem. They built the computers, but they realized that they weren't powerful enough. There was no way that they could possibly hold all the data they needed for the voyage to the moon and back. The solution was almost unbelievably crazy. Instead of simply storing the data in the computer itself, the team wrote thousands of lines of code that would be sent to the computer in real time via radio waves from mission control as the flight progressed. This meant that the computer was constantly receiving instructions on what to do next, which not only sounds crazy but was potentially very dangerous. If a transmission was lost or incorrect information was sent, it could throw the entire mission into chaos. You know how today when you're using your phone, sometimes the screen freezes because an app stops responding? Imagine if your car did that while you were driving down the highway. This is essentially what would have happened if a transmission was lost. For example, when the craft was approaching the moon, it needed to fire its engines for a course correction maneuver called the mid-course correction burn. If the burn didn't happen correctly, the ship would either crash into the moon or hurtle off into deep space forever. And worse still, the ability to perform this maneuver depended on data being transmitted from Earth. The only margin for error was approximately 1 second. If mission controls sent the signal to fire the engines just 1 second too late, the burn would fail, and the spacecraft would inevitably crash into the moon. To make matters worse, the astronauts inside the command module had no idea if the burn had been successful or not. Couldn't even see the ground beneath them, so they wouldn't know if they were crashing until just seconds before impact. Now imagine being inside that command module knowing that you're about to die. It's hard to comprehend the pressure that these astronauts were under during the mission, especially when you realize just how much could have gone wrong. And I mean really wrong. Apollo 11 left the launch pad at 9:32 a.m. on July 16, 1969. After a few days traveling through space, the crew performed a series of maneuvers to put the craft into orbit around the moon. If any part of this process had failed, the mission would have been over. Thankfully, everything went according to plan, and the craft successfully entered lunar orbit on July 19th. But here's the thing. They actually shouldn't have done this, you see. The path that Apollo 11 took to the moon was far from straightforward. In fact, it included passing behind the moon and coming around to the other side. If this had been attempted just a few weeks earlier, it could have been disastrous. That's because NASA was unsure whether or not the craft would be able to survive re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere after visiting the moon. To play it safe, they decided to take a route that would allow the astronauts to return home immediately in the event that re-entry didn't go to plan. But by the time Apollo 11 reached the moon, engineers had figured out that the ship would probably be okay. So they changed the plan, and the astronauts headed further around the moon, to the far side before beginning the descent to the surface. If the astronauts had taken the original route home, they would have passed through a cloud of extremely harmful radiation that could have killed them. But because they made it to the far side of the moon, they avoided this deadly zone and lived to tell the tale. By now, you're probably starting to understand just how much could have gone wrong. On the 19th, the astronauts began to prepare for the historic first moon landing. But right before it was going to happen, they experienced a potentially mission-ending problem. Buzz Aldrin was preparing for his job as lunar module pilot, which meant he had to don his spacesuit and enter the lunar module. But when he tried to close the door, it wouldn't budge. He tried again and again, but the door remained stuck. With just minutes to go before touchdown, this could have been the end of the mission. But somehow the door finally closed, and Aldrin was able to join Armstrong in the command module. As Neil Armstrong prepared to pilot the lunar module towards the lunar surface, he was met with an alarming sight. The surface below him looked like a sea of mountains. quickly realized that the landing site shown to him in pictures was nowhere to be seen. At this point, he had two choices: abort the landing or try to land in an area that looked relatively flat. Armstrong chose the latter, and it paid off. Had he chosen to abort the landing, it's unlikely that another attempt would have been scheduled so soon. But the problems didn't stop there. In fact, they were just getting started. When Armstrong began his descent towards the moon, he noticed something strange. The ship's automated landing system, which was supposed to guide the lunar module to a safe landing spot, was malfunctioning. Unable to trust the computer, Armstrong took manual control with just 120 seconds of fuel remaining. He began to look for a suitable landing spot. It was then that he spotted a crater with a relatively flat floor surrounded by boulders. He aimed for it and hoped for the best. Just as he touched down, Armstrong famously said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Had the ship crashed into the moon, it would have disintegrated on impact. Thankfully, Armstrong's quick thinking and skills saved the day, but it was a close call. With the lunar module now safely on the ground, Armstrong prepared for his walk on the moon. Before exiting the ship, he knew that he might never get the chance to return. He turned to his crewmate and said, "Okay, Buzz, here we go." It was then that Aldrin uttered the famous line, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And just like that, Armstrong became the first human being to set foot on the moon. He spent 2 hours outside the ship, taking samples, planting the American flag, and taking photographs. But while he was out there, the ship's temperature rose to 110 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. If Armstrong had stayed inside the ship, he wouldn't have survived. It's crazy to think that just a few hours later, both astronauts would be safely back inside the command module, enjoying some food and drinks that were specially designed to withstand the extreme temperatures of space. One of the biggest risks facing the astronauts during the landing was the constant threat of micrometeorites. While the lunar module was shielded against the vacuum of space, it offered little protection from tiny pieces of debris hurtling through the cosmos at high speeds. If a micrometeorite had struck the ship in just the right place, it could have caused a catastrophic breach, ending the mission and likely killing the astronauts. If you want a more in-depth explanation of the dangers posed by micrometeorites, I recommend checking out the video that explains how spaceships are designed to withstand them. But the dangers didn't end there. As the lunar module began its descent towards the lunar surface, it began to experience electrical problems. The ascent engine, which would be crucial for returning to lunar orbit, stopped working. If this issue hadn't been resolved quickly, it could have spelled disaster for the mission. Thankfully, after a few minutes of troubleshooting, the engineers on the ground were able to get the engine working again. But it was a close call that could have easily ended the mission. But you know what else could have ended the mission? This video ends now. Unlike NASA's computers, I don't receive tips on what to improve in real time, so please leave a comment below so that I can make my videos even better. As the astronauts prepared for their return trip to Earth, they knew that they faced one final major hurdle: re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Re-entry is one of the most dangerous parts of any space mission, and Apollo 11 was no exception. The lunar module began its journey, home by lifting off from the moon and docking with the command module still orbiting above the lunar surface. Once reunited with the command module, the astronauts prepared for the long journey back to Earth, but their journey was far from smooth. During re-entry, the command module experienced a series of intense vibrations, and the ship's structure was put under immense strain. If any part of the ship had failed during re-entry, it's likely that the astronauts would have been killed. But thankfully, the command module held together, and the astronauts survived the fiery plunge through the atmosphere. The journey home was fraught with danger, but it was also a testament to human ingenuity and courage. The Apollo 11 mission was a remarkable achievement that captured the imagination of people around the world. But it was also an incredibly risky endeavor. From the launch to the moon landings and return to Earth, the astronauts faced countless potential disasters that could have ended in tragedy. But against all odds, they survived and returned home safely. It's amazing to think that the success of the Apollo 11 mission depended on so many factors. A single mistake, a technical glitch, or a simple miscalculation could have had disastrous consequences. But thanks to the bravery of the astronauts and the hard work of the countless people who supported them, the mission was a success. And that's why it's so important to remember the incredible risks that they took, so that we can marvel at the bravery of those who dared to reach for the stars. So next time you hear someone complaining about their job, Just remind them that they can always just quit and go work for NASA. It can't be that bad, right? If you made it this far without spilling your coffee, you officially deserve to subscribe. Hit that button. Your curiosity and your caffeine addiction will thank you.